Monday before the order. First item for discussion is joint planning commission meeting. And for this, I'd like to invite in Planning Commission Chair Don Daniels and Vice Chair Connie Coleman-Lackady, and any other Planning Commission folks who are here.
Actually, Mayor, if I could, I think we were going to start with Ms. Murray and Ms. Helder on the legislative update.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for redirecting me. Due to scheduling difficulties, take this out of order and go to the legislative session update first with Brianna Murray and Shelley Helder from Gordon Thomas Honeywell Government Affairs. You know, in law, that's when you go to the commissioner or motion day and they take the attorneys first and the pro se's go last because the attorneys are on the meter. So, right. Good evening, ladies.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you so much for your flexibility this evening. These two new moms certainly do appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen and not waste any of your time this evening, and I'm just going to dive right in. As I do the screen share, though, I just want to say how excited I am to have Shelley Helder back from maternity leave and with me this evening. Just really, really thrilled to have her back at work, and appreciate your all's patience as I worked very hard this session to try and fill her shoes. So this evening, we are here to provide you with an overview of the 2021 legislative session and review the outcome of the city's legislative priorities and spend a little bit of time talking about next steps. Given that I was covering issues throughout the legislative session, I'm going to be giving the bulk of tonight's presentation, but we'll be handing it off to Shelley, and then you, of course, will be seeing much more of her now that she is back at work as we proceed forward. I'm going to start first with an overview of the 2021 legislative session. As I think you are all aware, the legislature operates on a 2-year cycle. This was the first year of that 2-year cycle. As such, it was a long legislative session and scheduled to last 105 days. Just to note, the second year of the cycle is 60 days. So that's why it's long. It's longer than the second year. New this year, as was the case for all of you in your council business, the legislature convened in a virtual format, and almost exclusively in a virtual format. Democrats held the majority in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, which meant they really set the agenda that outlined what items would advance forward in the legislative session. Because of the virtual format, legislators were encouraged to limit the number of bills that they introduced. As a result, 1,075 bills were introduced. That's about half of what we would see in a traditional year. However, 334 of those bills passed the legislature and were signed into law. That is on par with what a legislature does in an average year. They're usually right around between 350 and 400. So just shy of what we would see in an average year. Any bills that did not pass into law this session do automatically carry over into 2022, into the second year of the biennium. And so those issues are not completely gone. We will be continuing to hear of them as we move forward. In addition to the bills that the legislature considered, there was also a great deal of focus on adopting an operating capital and transportation budget. I think you all may be familiar that the state has 3 separate budgets: an operating, capital, and transportation. That is distinctly different from what you all have at the city, where you combine capital and transportation into one investment package. The state separates those out into 2 different ones. The operating budget is the one that you hear about most frequently in the media. It funds all state agency operations, including the K through 12 and higher education system. Going into the legislative session, there was a great deal of fear that there would be extremely limited revenues within the operating budget and a likelihood that cuts would be made as a result of revenues impacted through the pandemic. However, there are three different things that happened that resulted in a very robust operating budget. The first is that the March revenue forecast showed a rebound to pre-pandemic levels as far as revenue collections. The second is the federal government approved the American Rescue Plan Act, which provided the state with a total of $4.25 billion that must be spent by 2024. And just to note that that $4.25 billion, while I have it listed under operating, can also be spent in capital and transportation. The legislature also chose to enact a capital gains tax, which generated $415 million for this biennium. I will note that that capital gains tax is being challenged through the court system in terms of whether or not it is constitutional, but they did budget that $415 million. That left the legislature with a $59.2 billion biennial budget, which is about $3.2 billion more than their previous biennial budget. Within that, they left over $1 billion in reserves. The capital budget is funded with bonds that a portion of the operating budget is dedicated to paying back. This year, $3.9 billion in bonds were taken out. They reserved $80 million of that bond capacity for the supplemental year for the next year, the biennium, and they added in $589 million in stimulus funds. The transportation budget was by far the most challenging out of the three budgets. It also was anticipated to face some challenges as a result of the pandemic. However, unlike the operating budget, the revenues did not return to pre-pandemic levels in the March revenue forecast. In fact, they continued to be on a decline. In addition to the revenue shortfall, there's a court mandate, Supreme Court mandate, requiring the state to replace all of its state-owned culverts, which is an expensive endeavor requiring billions of dollars of investment. Those two factors, combined with the fact that there is an increasing demand for investments in new transportation projects, really spurred a robust discussion around a transportation revenue package. Throughout the legislative session, there was a lot of discussion about a grand bargain that would have included the approval of a transportation revenue package, approval of a low carbon fuel standard, and approval of a cap and trade system. The reason those three are connected is because the latter of those two does have an impact on fuel, an impact on fuel prices. The legislature reached agreement on those latter two, but they did not reach an agreement on a transportation revenue package. The legislature did include language in both the cap and trade and the low carbon fuel standard that would have prevented those bills from being fully implemented unless the legislature came along and adopted a 5-cent gas tax package by January 1 of 2023. However, just in the last couple of weeks, Governor Inslee did veto those provisions of those bills, making that connection, which means the cap and trade and low carbon fuel standard can proceed forward in being implemented, regardless of whether the legislature adopts a transportation revenue package. It's going to be challenged, legally challenged, whether or not the governor exercised his veto authority properly. However, regardless, the legal question is not likely to be resolved in a timely fashion. In recent discussions with transportation leaders, I think there's still strong desire to do a transportation revenue package, but the timing of when they might do such a package or reach an agreement on such a package is very unclear. Without a transportation package, they did adopt an $11.7 billion transportation budget that utilized about $1 billion of the federal ARPA funds to keep projects on schedule and to fulfill the court mandate to replace state-owned culverts. So projects were not paused or delayed or cut, but no new projects received funding. We'll transition to talking about the city's legislative priorities. And I think unless there's any pressing questions, I'll take questions at the end. I can't, when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see people. So Shelley, if you see hands or anything, you just chime in, stop me.
I'll let you know. So far, I don't see any.
Okay.
I'll take those at the end, Brianna.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, so this is an overview of your state legislative priorities. I'm really pleased to share with you that we accomplished a lot despite the virtual format and many other challenges of this session. We're going to go through each one of these, but I think visually this just was a good capture of how much progress we've made. The first item on your legislative agenda is economic development financing for the Lakewood landing site. This is something that we have been working on for several legislative sessions now. This year, there was a broad coalition who was working to pass tax increment financing, true tax increment financing, which exists in 48 other states, but has not existed in Washington state, despite many attempts. Generally, tax increment financing allows local property tax growth stemming from a new development like Lakewood Landing to be dedicated to support the new development and infrastructure specifically to support that development. This allows growth to pay for growth. The bill that the broad coalition worked hard to get this bill passed into law, which is, I would say, fairly historic given the number of years we've spent trying to get tax increment financing approved in Washington state. Some of the elements that really helped this bill get across the finish line is that, one, it really does only apply to local property taxes. So the state property tax is exempt, but all local property taxes are included, all special purpose districts. It does hold special purpose districts harmless in that any revenue that a special purpose district is currently collecting, they will continue to collect. The increase in property tax growth within the increment financing area is above the 1% threshold that a jurisdiction could typically collect, which is how we're keeping those special purpose districts whole. The project is required to complete an impact analysis and provide a mitigation plan to ensure that existing businesses and housing are being well thought of in terms of their future and in any project that moves forward. This is a new tool. I will say there are some nuances to it, and so it's a bit unclear of exactly what it means for the Lakewood landing site at this time. I look forward to working with city staff in running the different numbers and evaluating the pros and cons of different ways of utilizing the tax increment financing tool, but very pleased to see this bill get across the finish line.
Brianna, I'll just add as well that you mentioned it at the beginning, but this really priority is a good example of two of the things that we mentioned to you all when we advise on legislative priorities, and that's that it took several years for this item to be accomplished, and then also that there was a substantial amount of work that went into developing the coalition, as well as educating legislators and developing the legislation. And all that work occurred prior to the beginning of session in January. So again, just a really important reason why interim work is essential for effective advocacy.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley. That's spot on. We'll move on to another item that we've spent now several years working on, and that is funding for the Western State Hospital Community Partnership or Community Policing Program. This is a program that the state has funded since 2007 and funds it each year in the state's biennial operating budget. Over the years, we have asked that this be made statutorily permanent and have not been successful in getting that. We have been successful in getting the dollar amount adjusted upwards. This year, we just asked for funding to carry forward, especially given that at the beginning of session, when we developed the request and worked with the governor's office and DSHS, revenues were not very optimistic within the operating budget. I'm pleased to share that not only was the $621,000 for the program included within the final operating budget, but it was included in the governor's proposed budget as well as in each chamber's proposal, both the House and Senate chambers' proposed budgets. To me, that was a strong endorsement from both chambers as well as the executive branch that this is a positive program. Over the years, we've had years where it's been in one and not the other, and we've really had to advocate. But this year, I think there was a strong endorsement for the program. We will need to continue to ask that this funding be reauthorized as we move forward for the next biennium. So as the next year is the second year of the 2-year cycle, we don't have to worry about it. But come 2023, we will need to prioritize this again. Within the capital budget, we had several requests, all of which were honored this session. You have a lot of thanks to give to your 28th and 29th district legislators for this. We did have a very robust capital budget, one of the largest that I've seen, and Lakewood certainly benefited. So just to provide a rundown here for Wards Lake Park improvements, we had requested $250,000 through an earmark. Additionally, the project was positioned to receive funding through several grant programs and received $500,000 from WWRP, $500,000 from the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and $350,000 from the Youth Athletic Facilities account. Those 3 grant programs, really the credit goes to your excellent city staff and Parks Department for competing very well within those grant programs and putting together excellent grant applications. And then we were able to come in and ask for the earmark very successfully. A very similar story for the American Lake Park improvements. We requested $250,000 for ADA improvements for the park. And then again, the city was able to receive grant funding through WWRP and what's called the ALEA, or Aquatic Land Enhancement Account, for another $1 million. And again, parks staff really made that happen. We had a third request this year in partnership with the Living Access Support Alliance, or LASA. They requested that the legislature invest in their organization to expand their client services center and add in some services like laundry, showers, things along those lines. And they received $515,000 for their request. We were very integral in assisting them in navigating the legislative process. So I think the city can feel good about being a strong partner of LASA in helping them secure that funding. I'm going to pause there and let Shelley briefly go over the 2 items for SSMCP that we also wanted to highlight for you this evening.
Great. And I'll just mention really quickly, Brianna mentioned that both the earmark requests were for $250,000, and you'll see on the screen that the amount allocated is $258,000, and that additional amount is to cover the administrative fee that Commerce charges for the grant program, similar to the additional $15,000 for the LASA request. So City of Lakewood is one of the founding partners of SSMCP and is really critical in the partnership's success. SSMCP had 2 legislative priorities this session, one related to essentially establishing a more permanent source of funding for challenges like the North Clear Zone. It's referred to as the Defense Community Compatibility Account. So our request was for the state legislature to fund that account, which is very similar to the WWRP grant program in that communities apply and were ranked for projects. SSMCP applied and ranked, had 3 projects on the list. City of Lakewood had a project on the list. And so our request of the legislature was that they fully fund that program. Unfortunately, they chose not to fund that program. However, they did allocate $1.4 million towards the North Clear Zone land acquisition, which was one of the projects on that list. So rather than funding the entire program, they chose to just select one of the projects from the list, and the North Clear Zone, because of SSMCP's advocacy. And really a lot of credit needs to go to Senator Conway for his support of that request. And then not in the capital budget, but worth noting because of SSMCP's work, is $5 million was allocated within the transportation budget for the preliminary engineering and design along I-5 over the Nisqually River Delta. And this is, again, work that SSMCP has been doing for several years and is just one more step in making sure that there's adequate transportation to connect over the Nisqually Delta between Thurston and Pierce counties.
Great. Thanks, Jolly. And I'll just note that the appropriations outlined in this slide, when combined with the funding that was allocated to the community policing program, adds up to over $10 million of investments directly requested by the city of Lakewood. And that is a significant amount of funding for the city to be receiving through state grants and loans for important city projects and programs. And I would just note that that's fairly unprecedented as far as what other jurisdictions around the state receive, and would just give strong kudos to your 28th and 29th district legislators for really accomplishing what you all asked them to and outlined on your legislative priorities. The one item that didn't quite get across the finish line was funding for a $250,000 funding request for multimodal transportation study along I-5. And this was one reason I spent so much time talking about transportation earlier. The reason this project did not get funded really is because it got tied up into the broader discussion around transportation funding and a transportation revenue package. In short, there is no funding available for new transportation investments, even a study of this size, unless there is a revenue package. And while there was a lot of discussion about a revenue package, as I mentioned earlier, it did not get across the finish line. We did work hard to position the request to receive funding if there was an agreement on a revenue package, and that work culminated in the $250,000 being included in the House Miles Ahead package proposed project list, but not in the Senate proposal. So we certainly have more work to do to make sure that it is in both of those proposals and that a revenue package gets across the finish line in order for this item to move forward. In addition to what you all outline as your top priorities, you all also provide direction through your policy manual on several dozen items that we engage in. And throughout the legislative session, we send you weekly reports where we provide a great amount of detail on those many other issues. I'm not going to belabor too many of these issues, but I did just want to call out a few items. The first is that state shared revenues were not only fully funded, but for the first time in years, they were actually increased. Both the legislature provided additional funding to jurisdictions in order to meet new police, to comply with the new police reform package of bills that was approved. They also increased the amount of funding distributed to jurisdictions for cannabis sales, which may not have a direct impact for you all in Lakewood. And they fully funded the Public Works Assistant account at a historically high level. The legislature also approved AWC's requested legislation providing fiscal flexibility with several different revenue sources so that you all can make some adjustments to your budget to better recover from the pandemic. There was a historic level of funding allocated to affordable housing and shelter, much of which the city can access through grant programs or grant applications. There was fairly robust discussion around Land Use and Growth Management Act. I had staff spending a lot of time reviewing a lot of bills, and at the end of the day, those bills turned into some studies. So that will be an issue we'll be working on moving forward. There's the legislature passed legislation responding to the Blake Supreme Court decision that came out during the legislative session that made the possession of controlled substances legal. The legislation that they approved made it a misdemeanor rather than a felony, which may have some unintended or some unfunded mandates passed along to the city. So we want to spend some time thinking about implementation and some 2022 legislative requests on that subject. We once again saw some legislation on the rail safety oversight work. Rep. Levitt spearheaded this issue. Unfortunately, the bill didn't pass into law, but we did see some budget proviso language directing some further study work. And we actively supported, and I want to give a shout out to Councilmember Farmer for testifying many occasions, and I think also Councilmember Brandstetter on legislation regarding the placement of conditionally released sexually violent predators, and in particular in ensuring that county of origin policies are followed. So that's just a brief snapshot and very brief overview of a lot of issues that were discussed and passed into law this session. We did provide you with a comprehensive end of session report that goes into these in great detail that I think is several dozen pages long for your light reading pleasure. We want to start looking forward to next steps, and I'm going to turn it over to Shelley because now that she is back, I plan on having her help on all of these next steps.
Thanks, Brianna. So just to wrap up our presentation, I'll talk about some of the action items that we have for the coming months. I mentioned it earlier, but lobbying really is a year-round effort. So this interim, we have several things that we're hoping to tackle. The first is recognizing and expressing appreciation to the city's legislative delegation. We've said it and we really can't emphasize it enough that the city would not have the success that you all do without them. We can advise and we can counsel you and advocate on your behalf, but it's ultimately up to your legislators to secure the funding for the city's priorities. So we want to make sure that we thank them. We have scheduled them to join you all for the June 7th council meeting. We actually just finalized that as a date that works for the majority of them a few hours ago. So as many as are able from the 28th and 29th district will be joining us for that council meeting. We'll also be looking for other opportunities to thank them at ribbon cuttings or groundbreakings or other public events as appropriate. Brianna talked a little bit about transportation. There is a potential for a special session if they do reach agreement on a transportation revenue package. Legislators have said that they are going to continue working on negotiating that package over the coming months. So that possibility remains. We'll remain engaged to make sure that we're taking advantage of any potential funding opportunities for the multimodal transportation study. And then unique to this year, we will be following the activities of the Redistricting Commission, which is currently meeting regularly to consider how to redraw Washington's legislative and congressional district boundaries. And this is done every 10 years to reflect population changes. The outcome of this redistricting will take place or will take effect for the November 2022 election cycle. And then looking ahead, the 2022 legislative session will begin on January 10th, and it's going to be the second year of the biennium. So the legislature is going to be amending their biennial budgets that they just adopted. And to prepare for that session, we'll be updating the city's legislative agenda and policy manual to reflect the outcomes from this past session. So before we open it up for questions, I do want to add, I know that we've mentioned it briefly, but I want to emphasize that we would not be as effective at our job if not for the incredible city staff that get us the information and respond to emails and phone calls at all times of day during the legislative session. I know that I was out on maternity leave for much of this year, but the Lakewood City staff is like no other. They really do work hard, and we're happy to be part of the city's team. So I will stop there and see if there are any questions.
And I think I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen so we can actually see you all.
Yeah, you can actually see people. So any get the participants list up. Questions for Brianna or Shelley? Mr. Whalen.
Well, I just want to echo the thanks of all of us for your great efforts this year and in previous years, which teed up a lot of the great successes this year. So thank you all. I'm sure the rest of us will communicate that. My question to you, Brianna, is the transportation cap or the transportation budget. Is there some likelihood that, given the pending federal infrastructure bill, that we might see some enhanced work with the legislature to kind of dovetail with what the feds may do? And what might that look like? Yeah.
Yeah, great question. So actually, the concern is the opposite. It's that the state will wait until the federal government does a transportation package before really digging in seriously to try and negotiate an agreement. I've had the pleasure of hearing from 2 different congressmen in the last 2 weeks, both of which had the same message for the state, and that was, do not wait for us.
Wow.
It does not seem as though a federal transportation package is moving along on a timeline where the state would have the information that they need to do a special session in September or October from the federal government. And I think realistically, both state and federal investments are needed in order to move our transportation system forward. I guess to answer your question, I think it's very possible that state legislators will say, oh, we're going to wait and do anything, until we see what the federal government does. I would say from an advocacy standpoint, if we want to see a transportation investments, we should push back on that message.
And then given the fine work everyone is doing on climate control related issues and more electrical infrastructure for electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, and how that impacts the gas tax revenues for maintenance, how are they grappling with that nut roll given the competing policy initiatives to decrease fossil fuel use and yet face decreased revenues as a result for the transportation budget and maintenance activities?
Sure. So there's a few different concepts that have been floated. One is the cap and trade system generates a bit over $5 billion that is dedicated toward transportation. Now, the transportation investments that will be made with that revenue have to be carbon reducing transportation investments, which really means multimodal. It's funding for bike ped facilities, transit, and whatnot. But there's a great deal of need there that has been demonstrated by the many requests coming forward from throughout the state. And that vote has already been taken. So arguably you've got about just over $5 billion in transportation revenue for those purposes available. As far as the gas tax goes, there's been some discussion about indexing gas tax to inflation to help address the issue of a declining, otherwise being a declining revenue source. And then the Washington State Transportation Commission has been doing a lot of work around a road usage charge. We saw the legislature once again provide them encouragement and ongoing direction to continue that work, with the idea that a road usage charge would eventually replace the gas tax.
Oh, okay.
I do think that road usage charge is probably not going to be ready for implementation for a revenue package imposed within the next 5 years. So they're likely looking at at least one more gas tax increase before shifting to a new revenue generator.
Something to look forward to.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Brandstetter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to express my appreciation for the the assistance that was provided in this unique session when, in order to be able to testify, and of making that, navigating that process easier. I greatly appreciated the help that I got on multiple occasions where I had occasion to do that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, our pleasure. And I have to give kudos to a third member of our team who isn't here this evening, and that's Holly Kochi. She was really the tech support on steroids this session, and understood all the Zoom and e-sign-in idiosyncrasies far better than me. And so I'm glad she was really able to help you. I'm not going to try and take credit for any sort of that tech savviness, but I'm glad we had the team to help you out.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want you to comment. Earlier, you mentioned that there was a whole host of, I think it was housing bills that ended up as studies. And I take that as partial good news, because during the session, I was always worried. It seems as though state legislators increasingly want to get involved in local zoning issues. I call it statewide zoning. Where are we at with those, and what kinds of things should we be looking for? And is that something we should consider advocating against in future sessions?
Sure. So the specific slide was around legislation on the Growth Management Act, and there were several bills that would have required the city to undergo more planning activities, and what AWC's argument was in those policy discussions, and I think it was very effective, was that if you're going to give jurisdictions more planning responsibilities, you have to provide planning funding for that work. Generally, those planning bills do not have preemption within them. We did have one exception to that this session, and it was the one bill that one of the GMA bills that actually did pass. So House Bill 1220, and again, this is outlined in your written report, does direct for jurisdictions to update your housing element. The legislature did not fund cities to perform that planning work. So you all are actually not obligated to undertake updating your housing element unless the legislature allocates funding. There was another section of the bill, though, that in addition to directing you to update your housing element, preempted cities on the siting of emergency housing and shelters. And the way the language reads is that starting in September, emergency shelter and housing are required to be allowed anywhere that hotels are allowed within your community, unless you adopt an ordinance identifying a majority of zones within 1 mile of transit where emergency shelter and housing can be located. There's also some language that allows you to continue to pass health and safety requirements and regulations associated with emergency shelter and housing. I will say that while it is preemption, it is significantly more amenable or mitigated preemption from what was introduced at the beginning of session. Generally, as cities, not necessarily just City of Lakewood, but city advocates as a whole, we've been pretty effective at defending against bills that preempt local control. And I'd say a really big part of that is that in the House, we've developed a local government caucus, a group of about a dozen legislators that's bipartisan, and local control and opposing preemption is sort of their main purpose to exist as a caucus. The other area where we saw some preemption discussions was around accessory dwelling units. In my conversation with city staff, it actually seems that you already have a lot of the looser ADU regulations that are desired by advocates at a statewide level. So the impact to the City of Lakewood is not significant for those proposals.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say to the group, for the team, that you guys worked really hard for the City of Lakewood, and we want you to know that we truly appreciate all of your efforts. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. It's great to hear after a very long session with many hours in front of a screen.
Yeah, and with all your other responsibilities. So
Yeah.
congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, anyone else have any questions? I have one regarding redistricting, though I recognize that we don't have a lot of influence in that regard. We just keep us apprised if things start to shift significantly, no matter what your political viewpoint is. You have to recognize that Lakewood is blessed being almost bifurcated by 2 legislative districts. We aren't fractioned out, and we're a significant force in both those districts where we have 60,000 people. We get 4 people in the House that can go to bat for us, 2 in the Senate. And normally there could be 2.5 cities our size in 1 district. So we certainly would like to keep that going. And if there's anything that we can do or you hear anything shifting the wrong way, please let us know.
Sure, absolutely. I'm happy to share what little insight I do have around redistricting. We are anxiously awaiting actual census data, but OFM has provided some preliminary data based on just population trends over the past 10 years. And that preliminary data, and again, it is not the actual census data, so subject to change, would have the 28th and 29th districts geographically getting larger because the population growth within the region has not been as quick or at quite a rate of speed as other areas of the state. So what that looks like in terms of the actual drawing of the maps, we'll be watching the Redistricting Commission very closely, but just as some insight into what we're anticipating.
Well, good. And thank you again for all your hard work. I know it's hectic during the session, and you had more important things to do, Ms. Helder. And I just volunteer. I know she hasn't been consulted on this, but I volunteer Lakewood's resident expert on raising twins, City Manager or City Attorney Heidi Wachter, as a resource. So she survived. Yeah, good luck.
Yes, she actually offered me some wise words, so I appreciate her counsel.
So thanks again. And we'll see you again when we get set up for next year.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you.
Well, will we not see them on the 7th
Well,
with the legislators?
we will see you on the 7th, yes, with the 28th and 29th. Although all the credit that night goes to them. This is our opportunity to talk with you all, and then I hope that on the 7th it's their opportunity.
Okay. So thanks again. And now we will move to a joint meeting with the Planning Commission and call up Chair Don Daniels, Vice Chair Connie Coleman-Lackady, and other members as available. And for the intro on this, we have Planning Manager Tiffany Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I don't see Chair Don Daniels, but I do see that Connie Coleman-Lackady is on the phone. Oh, there he is. Mr. Daniels is in Mexico, so we were hoping that his connection would work this evening. You have in your packet, starting at page 3, a written report that discusses what's happened so far this year and looking ahead at the work plan for 2021. But other than that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Daniels.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much, Mayor and City Council. As they said, I am down in Mexico. Very nice, but spotty internet connection. Sorry.
And don't bring back any of their planning policies.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Or there's safety issues down here as well. Let's see if I can get this.
Now we can see it too.
Okay, good. So I want to first of all, thank the mayor and the council for finally the commission, planning commission has a full slate of commissioners. We appreciate that. Ms. Connie Coleman-Lackady was voted in as vice chair. Again, I was voted in the chair. We're happy to have Mr. Combs, Mr. Guerrero, and welcoming Mr. Larson, Mr. Pearson, and Mr. Wagaman all are on our team, and our city council liaison, Mr. Boki, of course. Thank you. So this evening, I'm just going to go through a few of our accomplishments and then what's on the horizon for us. Kind of a red screen here, but we'll continue on. Okay, so first of all, we had elections of the chair. Like I mentioned before, I don't know if it was a privilege or an honor, but again, I was the chair and Ms. Connie Coleman-Lackady was the vice chair. We did receive the annual housing report in the first quarter. We did have our first joint meeting with the Community Service Advisory Board regarding city affordable and attainable housing needs. That was also in the first quarter, and it looks like we're going to have another meeting in the fourth quarter. We reviewed and developed the recommendations on the 2021 Comprehensive Plan, MAP, and text amendments, which also included the new Energy and Climate Change chapter that will be further reviewed in 2022. I do want to say that we did have a very interesting exercise that Mr. Buer had on that 2021 comprehensive plan on the energy and climate change. I thought it was very interesting, if I could, to say he gave us a little exercise to go through the information provided by staff, a lot of policies, and then how would those policies be implemented. And we submitted our information. He asked for 10 of the top list. And when the report came back with all of the commissioners, it was pretty much individualized. It was hard to pick out what of those policies and implementations of those policies. I would say 3, maybe 4 of the policies were similar in 3 or 4 of the commissioners, but then it was wide open. So we had a long debate this last meeting and provided kind of a conclusion that if we send to the council the kind of full array, and then we could take a look as it down, like it says, down the road in future to define or refine some of those policies and the implementation of those policies. So it gave us an opportunity to work on it since it was quite extensive. And I thought the staff did a great job. So also we reviewed and the implementation process of the Vision 2050 policies and actions. We're going to do that every quarter. Review and develop the recommendations of the Lakewood Station, district sub-area plan and hybrid form-based code. We did that in the first quarter. And then we also received the 2022 biddable lands report status. We did it first quarter, second quarter, and we're going to have it as well in the fourth quarter. Some things that still are on our agenda for the rest of the 2021 is review and make recommendations on pending CDBG home consolidation plan amendments. And it will say that these amendments are specific to CDBG, CV Phase 3 funds and establishment of a tenant-based rental assistant program. And there's 2 little parentheses, the first and second quarter, that this parentheses represent tentative time period and tied with the City of Tacoma actions. So we also are going to review and develop recommendations on 2022 to 2027 6-year transportation improvement plan, the TIP plan that's coming in the second quarter. Review and develop the recommendations on excess right-of-ways in the city, both the second and third quarter. Periodic review of the comprehensive plan map and text items in the anticipation of 2024 statutory update. Those are going to be the next quarters moving forward. Review and development of the recommendations on annual development regulations amendment package. These are technical edits to the Lakewood Municipal Title 18A through 18C. Those are in the third and fourth quarter. Review and development of the recommendations of 2022 comprehensive plan docket, excuse me. It's 2 hours ahead here in Mexico, so you know it's a little bit late. It's a long day in the sun. And we have a comprehensive review of the city housing policies and programs, including the comprehensive plan goals, policies, and objectives, Title 18A, CDBG, home, the RHSP, and administrative policies. Review and development of the recommendations on design review, including landscaping, commercial zoning districts outside of the boundaries existing proposed sub-area plans. And this is all going to carry over into 2022. Kind of a heavy load, especially working through the summer. So we still have a lot on our agenda to get thing accomplished and send it to your way for further review. So any questions or any comment by Ms. Coleman Lackady as well? Any comments?
Mr. Branster has a question.
Yes.
You're on mute, Mike.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, you know, I appreciate your clarifying comments and acknowledging the complexity of the climate change document in the chapter to go into that. However, I do need a little bit of clarification about the recommendation that you sent to us on that. It says that you recommend approval, but with a proviso that the city council direct the planning commission to review the goals, policies, and implementation measures and other things. So how do I interpret that if we don't include that provision, are you then recommending disapproval, or are you recommending that rather than approval, it just be the whole package be moved forward into the 2022 cycle? Trying to understand what you're really telling us there.
I would say that we pretty much recommend of the whole package is as a body that the commission majority, that's the direction they felt comfortable with. They didn't feel comfortable taking out things piece by piece. It was too in depth at that time. So we the commission, as a majority, felt that was the best way to provide as much information to the council to move forward. I guess that's my explanation of it. I don't know if Miss Tiffany or I don't see Mr. Buer on. If Tiffany had a.
This is Connie.
Yeah.
Can you hear?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to add also, Don, that I think one of the things that we were thinking about is because of the exercise that we went through, there were some areas that we thought maybe needed more, a deeper look later, but we wanted to make sure that the council had something to move forward with, and if they brought back something that was different, that we would have that opportunity to look at it based on some of the different variances that we came up with as individuals.
So let me just, what I think I've heard is that you're recommending that we approve it now to get a chapter into the comprehensive plan, but that we should anticipate that the Planning Commission in developing the 2022 docket would be putting some items on the 2022 docket that would be in the form of amendment to this. Is that kind of what the commission is thinking?
Mike, correct. Councilmember Brenstetter, yes, that is correct. I would say is your explanation of that is correct.
Okay. I had one other. Yeah. Okay. I had one other question on your yet to be done things. You have review and development of recommendations on the 2022-2027 6-year TIP. As something that you have it listed as not yet completed, but as a second quarter action. And we have scheduled the approval of that TIP for the June 7th council meeting. Have we gotten ahead of you?
Ms. Spear?
Just to let the council know, that is on the June 2nd Planning Commission meeting agenda.
So on June 7th, we'll have the benefit of your recommendation. Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else have questions for committee members? I guess Planning Commission members of the committee. Well, Ms. Spear, you have a comment?
I do, very quickly, Mr. Mayor, just to let you know that the Planning Commission's agenda going forward into the next few months may be subject to change depending on ARPA and how they may be involved in the community engagement process that the council has directed happen. So there may be some additional items actually that happen coming to you as well.
Yeah, makes sense.
I would like to also make one other comment, last comment, if we're almost done. Is that I would just, Tiffany has been awesome in getting us situated and doing our Zooms and stuff like that. And I think I'd just like to thank the city staff support team that has helped us a lot in keeping us informed, keeping us on track, and also adding additional information when we're asking for additional information. So thank you to them as well.
Yep, and I second that as well. Without them, the direction and work would be heavy load for all of us commissioners without the assistance by all the staff. So we thank them.
Well, we thank you for all that you folks do on your lofty salaries of nothing after working you to the bone. I'm glad to see you could escape and enjoy yourself a little bit of time.
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
And we look forward to seeing the Planning Commission meeting in person here in the not too distant future.
Yes, we appreciate that. Yes.
So thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
So we'll move on to a review of the 2021 Comprehensive Plan amendments with Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, Tiffany Spear on behalf of the City Community and Economic Development Department. I'll share my screen, but before I start, just quickly, there are 10 amendments that we'll be going through this evening. And the one will be the most complicated, as you can probably anticipate, will be that new proposed energy and climate change chapter. And Mr. Buer is actually going to walk you through that one, and then I'll take you through the rest. But let me just get started here really quickly. So last July was when the process began for the public call for updates to the comprehensive plan and zoning map. In October, the Planning Commission recommended a list of 11 amendments to the council. On December 7th of 2020, the council adopted a resolution that formalized the list of applications. And then in February of this year, the council adopted a second resolution that removed one application, and that was numbered 2021-07 and related, if you'll recall, to a potential new industrial center of local importance. And then also the council added several parcels to an application looking at the Tillicum area. So there were those two changes made this February. In March of this year, the Planning Commission held its public hearing and kept the comments open for the next commission meeting. And then where we are now is with the commission having forwarded to you their resolution that includes their recommendations on each of the 10 proposed amendments, some of which are text, some are map and text. And after tonight, on June 7th, the public hearing is scheduled for the council. June 14th, a second study session if the council desires it. And then at this point, June 21st is the date scheduled for the actual action on adopting these amendments. So with that, I'm going to stop talking myself and turn it over to Mr. Buer, but I'll be running the slides for him. So Mr. Buer.
Thank you, Tiffany. This slide basically shows you that we are replacing the sustainability chapter on energy and climate change with a new chapter. The original sustainability chapter was inserted several years ago so that we could obtain certification from PSRC. It needed an update, and at about the same time we were thinking about updating it, along comes Department of Commerce that offered a grant, which we applied for and obtained, in the amount of $20,000 to start working on a climate change chapter. I would also point out that there was only $100,000 set aside. There were only 5 cities and counties chosen. And I really do think that the process that Department of Commerce implemented was a test to see how cities and counties would address climate change. And so this is the result of that work. A couple of points here are the chapter examines how land use and transportation affects energy consumption and determines what measures can be implemented to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's also increasing state and regional direction on greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, some of those questions are beginning to show up on Mary Dodsworth grant applications. So that became something that we wanted to address as a part of this process. Lakewood also partnered with ICLEA, which is an international organization also referred to as Local Governments for Sustainability. We used their technical expertise to try to develop a greenhouse gas inventory for Lakewood, but I will let you know from the very get-go, this ended up being an extremely challenging project because we are not a full-service city. And that is one thing Department of Commerce is monitoring quite closely, is how does a city like Lakewood accomplish climate change? We also hired AHBL to review the draft chapter for accuracy. And then the Planning Commission did a review and conducted a review of the implementation steps. They did recommend approval. I'm going to speak a little bit more to the Planning Commission's actions later in this presentation. Next slide. So here's a summary of what's in the table of contents. The chapter is a purpose, renewable energy today, what climate change looks like within the region and in Lakewood. There's an interesting chapter called Lakewood Climate Change Advantages and Challenges. In many documents like this, you don't see this section, but if you read it carefully, you begin to recognize that the City of Lakewood has done actually quite a few things already as it's trying to attempt to address greenhouse gas emissions, and probably didn't even recognize that it was doing so. We've attempted to inventory greenhouse gas emissions in Lakewood using a variety of sources. We've tried to address it through the Washington State's RCW on emission reduction standards, which I think are at this point very, very difficult to meet, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Another interesting thing that we've never done before is Lakewood's energy generation and use. And what kind of energy? Is it electricity? Is it natural gas? What might it be? That was a major undertaking and took several months before we could get the information and verify it. So if nothing else, that is a major accomplishment in this document. We also talked about carbon sequestration, and that is taking advantage of Lakewood's open space areas in the event that we get into a cap and trade situation. There's findings and recommendations, and then there's a whole bunch of policies and implementation measures. A recommendation from the commission was to approve, but the commission also wanted to have another shot at the implementation measures, as it was a little bit overwhelming. I'll talk about that a little bit too. Citywide emissions, we started by using the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency emissions inventory in 2015. And so all we did was took information from population and just sort of adjusted the numbers and just compared 2015 to what 2019 would look like. And if we go to the next slide, that's what it shows. But I had some strong reservations about this because the data for greenhouse gas emissions and inventory in Washington state at the county and local level is very difficult. The state does provide information on emissions at the statewide level, but does not get into counties or regions nor cities. Only the cities that are doing their own inventories are providing the information. So we're not really convinced that this was the best chart to use. So then we move on to the next piece here. We started looking around, and I found that Google has a program called Environmental Insights Explorer, and this was started in 2018, and it was offered to a few select cities in California. We became aware of the program in the fall or winter of 2020, and I was just curious whether or not even Google would even consider us, because we were outside their region where they've done this before. I made a call, sent some emails, and I never heard back from them. And then all of a sudden, in the early part of 2021, we found out that they did do an analysis. And I believe that Lakewood is the first Pacific Northwest city to use Google's program to try to calculate and model greenhouse gas emissions and activity and potential reduction opportunities. There's a brief discussion in the second paragraph that talks about how it does it. But basically what you're seeing for the first time is big data being used in Lakewood by Google to take a look at greenhouse gas emissions. They've gone so far as to determine the total square footage for all structures in the city of Lakewood, both residential, commercial, and industrial. And from there, go ahead and begin the calculation, not only of greenhouse gas emissions, but also the potential for energy production using solar energy. This is a unique undertaking. I feel like I'm a little over my head in this analysis, but again, we're trying to break ground here and do something a little bit different, I think, which will be advantageous to Lakewood, and a lot of other places in the area are watching us. When Pierce Transit found out that we were doing this, they are considering contacting Google to see if Google can do data estimates on their greenhouse gas emissions within their region. So more to follow on this, but I just want to a little shout out here to city staff. I think we're trying to do something and provide the council with good information to make good policy decisions. Next slide. This talks about what I just talked about. It mentions how you use greenhouse inventory to prioritize investments and develop policies. And in most cities, and in Lakewood in particular, transportation greenhouse gas emissions is the most significant as a result of the fact that we are a bedroom community, and large numbers of people, over 16,000, prior to the COVID-19 left the city of Lakewood to work elsewhere, which generates a considerable amount of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. Next slide. This is the method by which Google translates data from transportation into distance to total fuel used, and then estimates carbon emissions. I will advise the council that the emissions number for transportation is a little bit overstated because it includes I-5 and 512. I'm going to be talking with Google about amending that and taking those out. We would get a better number. But that's going to be an issue at the state level as more cities and the like try to perform these kinds of analyses. How do you take into account regional impacts and major highways? Should they be considered in part of the city, or they should be kept out altogether? You know, my recommendation is they should not be included in our greenhouse gas inventory. Next slide. Same thing, this is how they do it for building. They determine total floor area, from there total energy used, and then carbon emissions. Total floor area in this case is calculated by aerial photography and other things that Google uses. And we now can tell you the total millions of square feet of commercial, industrial, and residential buildings in the city of Lakewood, as well as the amount of devices that you can install upon your roof in order, if you wanted to install solar panels. They also take into account the locations of the roof, whether the house is located in a southerly direction. They also take into account removed chimneys and other paraphernalia on the roof so that you can get a good analysis. So I actually do have aerial photographs that shows the areas in the city of Lakewood with the highest potential for solar panels. One of the more interesting things, and there's been some discussion with the commission a little bit on this, is working with some of the energy providers and doing some pilot projects for solar panels on large industrial warehouse projects. So more to follow on that, but this is a sort of a graphic that I found from Google to show you how they calculate carbon emissions on buildings. Next slide. Okay. This one basically says if you use the Google data using 2019 information, which is a first, our numbers show about 640,000 pounds of carbon gas being emitted into the city of Lakewood. The next paragraph talks about what we can save if we were to install solar panels on the city of Lakewood facilities throughout the city. It's a fairly significant reduction in total greenhouse gases. They also show that the total solar panel production in the city of Lakewood is only 2%. The other thing that I would also mention on the greenhouse gas emissions for residences and businesses, Google uses a fuel mix of 50-50, 50% electricity and 50% petroleum. That's not true in this area. It's more like 80 to 90% electricity. That's another factor we need to modify in our emissions inventory to reduce our total. But not taking into account those two amendments, based upon this RCW that was adopted fairly recently by the legislature, and I'm not sure people are paying attention to this. These are, if you use the targets in that RCW, this would show you what the city of Lakewood would be having to reduce its carbon footprint or greenhouse gas emissions at these levels by 2030, 2040, and 2050. Personally, I find this to be aspirational. It, in my opinion, fails to take into account the large amount of electricity that is renewable that's being used in the Puget Sound region. And as such, I think the numbers aren't going to work. I've communicated that to ICLEA, who's also communicated that to the governor's office or governors and staff. There's a problem here, but this needs additional work from Department of Ecology, Department of Commerce, but that's what the law says at the moment. And so I like to just share that with the council. Next slide. This is kind of a repeat of what we just said above. if Lakewood is going to try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, I listed several things that I think are in the category that you council may wish to pursue. Cooperative agreements with utility providers, which we have 3, tighten sustainability regulations, promoting intermodal and public transportation, community education outreach, introduction of electric vehicles and hybrids, energy conservation, which is being compelled by the state anyway on building permit activity, in efforts to enhance carbon sinking, or also known as carbon sequestration. Next slide. So here we get into some of the basic goals. There are 5 in total. The first is leadership. The second is clean and efficient transportation options. The third is sustainable and efficient energy systems. Next slide. Fourth is sustainable development, which we are pursuing with some of our planning documents currently. And this is something that people miss, is actually we have a pretty good hazards management program that is administered through the police department and through others. And this is really significant because it's really helping us develop a climate resilient community. At the point that the council begins to adopt some of these implementation measures and policies, I will be taking a deep dive into the hazardous management plan and updating it, and then bringing that back for council review. But that's something you have that I don't think we're using as fully as we should. Next slide. We also included some findings that it is possible for Lakewood to show leadership. We can regulate land uses and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We can improve active modes of transportation. I think there's some strong elements of restoring and protecting the natural environment. Things that people fail to recognize is we do a lot to protect our trees in the city of Lakewood, and preparing for potential climate change as critical as greenhouse gas impacts and planning for long-term sustainability. Okay, now that is, stop right there, it's Tiffany. Now there's some things I want to add that's not part of the presentation. I want to go back to the Planning Commission recommendation. The climate change chapter has over 80 implementation measures. And the reason we have so many is since this community has never discussed climate change, frankly, we were not sure where to start. So I listed everything that I could think of. I chose to be comprehensive and perhaps a little OCD. I also took advantage of some extensive work in reviewing climate change policies and programs from other cities of similar size and makeup of Lakewood. So you have a comprehensive list of things that you can do if you want. It doesn't mean you have to do all of them, but it's a good starting place for discussion with this community and with the council on what is it you want to accomplish with climate change. I also feel like some degree I overwhelmed the Planning Commission, but it wasn't intended, but we needed to start somewhere. Planning Commission really struggled with this assignment, and to help commissioners, it was suggested that they choose their individual top 10 implementation measures, and then we could compare and contrast the results. Now, I had no idea where this was going to go. Neither did they, and I thought they felt that the assignment was kind of fun. So we compared, and absolutely no consensus whatsoever from the commissioners. However, if you examine some of their written comments carefully and what they said when they were debating, there were some areas that seemed to stand out. First of all was water conservation, garbage and recycling, and urban agriculture. They felt very strongly about urban agriculture. Also, it was interesting to look at what they didn't vote for, which is also quite telling. I will tell you very quickly, and I knew this was going to happen, but I just wanted to verify it. Reducing personal vehicle miles traveled was a total non-starter. They want to make, commission members want to be able to have independence and use their vehicles. So following the commission's actions, the commissioners also suggested we start on low-hanging implementation measures. And you see this reflected in their resolution, and I will not go any further into that because there's already been some discussion there. I would also like to point out that in doing this exercise, what made it so difficult was that Lakewood is not a full-service community, which makes it very difficult to set priorities on the subject of climate change. One last thing, and this is new information. I want the council to be aware of a new chapter 173-445 WAC, which is under review, which is supposed to become effective in October 2021. And it's called the Greenhouse Gas Assessment for Projects, also referred to as the GAP rule. And if adopted, and I assume it will be, the SEPA checklist will be modified, so then we will be in the process of reviewing new projects for their impact on greenhouse gases. Now, this is specific to commercial and industrial development. It will potentially have impacts in Lakewood specific to large boilers. That's in hospitals, Western State Hospital, our 2 colleges, Clover Park School District facilities, and City Hall. I don't think that they have paid any attention on the impact this is going to have on public facilities. Also unknowns are warehouses and distribution centers. Another unknown is port facilities. And the last one is waste facilities and how it could impact waste connections in the event they wish to expand. They've been talking about mitigation projects to be used or prioritized. They are attempting to address environmental justice and those who are communities disproportionately affected by climate change. Also low-income populations, minorities and communities of color, and tribal communities, but they have not made any decisions in these areas. Yet they are supposed to be taking action by sometime in October. These new rules would not apply to programmatic reviews or plans like a comprehensive plan update, highway, road, or passenger rail projects, and housing projects. So I just want to make sure that the council is aware that climate change continues to move forward in some form or fashion. It's going to have significant impacts upon this department when we get into commercial and industrial expansions of a large nature or major remodels. I don't know what this looks like yet, but I wanted to bring it to the council's attention again. This stuff is moving forward in one form or another, and we're trying very hard to stay in front of it. Now that concludes my presentation on the climate change chapter. And I don't know if you have questions now, or should we move forward with Tiffany's review of the rest of the comprehensive plan amendments. Mr. Mayor, how would you like to proceed?
Unmuted. Please continue.
Okay. Tiffany, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Mr. Buer, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. Continuing then, oops. Sorry, 1 second. There we go. So just for purposes of the record, there was the SEPA analysis performed on that first application for a comprehensive plan amendment. Many of the items were not applicable to this chapter because it is not a actual physical project. There was no housing capacity change to the city. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Changing circumstances, just the fact that the sustainability chapter currently in the city's comprehensive plan is more and more out of date as the state and regional actions proceed on climate change policy. And then this does improve consistency among the various chapters within the city's comprehensive plan. So moving on to the next application, this is 2021-02. And when it was first brought to the council and then eventually to the commission, it was stated in terms of having to look at what's this pink area here, which is the currently existing Springbrook Center of Local Importance. However, the point of this amendment was simply to update the comprehensive plan to reflect that last year the council rezoned these parcels in gold to be industrial. And when we took a look at this closer, as you can see on this map, Clover Creek, as well as just the parcels themselves, are separate and apart from that COLI. So there is no change proposed to this residential center of local importance in Springbrook. And the amendments that are proposed for 2021-02 simply reflect the rezoning of this part of the Springbrook area to be industrial. And this is recommended for approval. Again, the analysis was performed. There's no change to housing capacity. It's improving internal consistency to reflect the fact that this zoning occurred last year. It's concentrating industrial development near I-5 and 512 corridors. Again, it's not a specific project, so a number of the items are not applicable in terms of SEPA analysis. And then the advantage versus negative impacts. There are no negative impacts. This is, again, improving internal consistency within the comprehensive plan. 2021-03 is a similar type of amendment in that what it does is recognize last year's adoption by council of the legacy plan, the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space plan. And it is a number of edits throughout the comprehensive plan, but it really is changing "we will do this" to "we have done that" type of analysis, updating dates and the title of the plan, etc. A lot of technical amendments to reflect that this plan was adopted in 2020. Recommendation from the Planning Commission was approval. Once more, the analysis, no change to the city's housing capacity, improving the consistency within the comp plan to reflect its adoption, specific project impacts not applicable. The advantages are, again, increasing internal consistency, no negative impacts. And then there is just a note that there are several maps within the current comprehensive plan that are not within what was done this year, which will be updated in next year's cycle as one more step to reflecting changes in parks and open space planning, not only by the city, but by other open space owners, property owners within Lakewood. The fourth, 2021-04, is looking at some housing changes based on state statutory and regional policy changes. So it's updating the definition of affordable housing per the RCW definition. Also, 2- and 3-family detached or attached housing units are now going to be allowed in the R1, 2, 3, and 4 zones. And also multifamily units are allowed in the mixed residential 1 and 2 zones. This is affected by the fact that the densities allowed in those zones are not being changed. So this little table here that shows you the dwelling units per acre density for each of the zones, residential 1, 2, 3, 4, and mixed residential 1 and 2 are staying the same. So the only time where you may see these additional types of housing units are when there is enough acreage accrued in order for the density limits to be met. The other thing that you'll see here are changes in the 18A40 table to reflect the allowance of these types of units in these various zones. This is recommended for approval by the Planning Commission. Looking at the analysis, there is the potential for additional housing capacity, but it's going to depend very much on the specific parcel sizes that this may be considered for in the future. So there's really no way to predict. Other than that it may increase. It's not going to result in a decrease in housing units that are currently seen for the city. Consistent with the comprehensive plan and also improving consistency between the comprehensive plan and then the city's CDBG and home programs, rental housing safety program, and other housing programs. It's not a specific project, so there's a number of impacts that aren't applicable. The change in circumstances are the changes to state law and regulation, as well as regional policy. And then again, advantages versus disadvantages or negative impacts, looking at allowing additional types of housing throughout the city to help address housing need. 2021-05 relates to Western State Hospital. And when this came through the city council consideration last fall and early this year, it was assumed at the time that the master plan update for Western States Complex would have been submitted and reviewed by this point. However, it was just submitted on May 7th, so we have not had time to review it as a department, much less make its way to the point of being a comprehensive plan amendment. So the recommendation is to continue this amendment into the 2022 comprehensive plan cycle, and then we will take it up with next year's package, because as we sit right now, the Community and Economic Development Department is beginning its review of the submittal of a new master plan for Western State. Amendment number 6 is similar to what you saw for the Parks Plan, excuse me, in that these are plans that have already been adopted and now they're being reflected in the comprehensive plan itself. The Downtown Subarea Plan, which was adopted at the end of 2018, and then the Lakewood Station District Subarea Plan, which you as a council just adopted actually a few weeks ago. This is a new updated map which reflects both of these adopted subareas within the city. But there, much more than this map, there's a number of areas within the comprehensive plan where either policies encourage the creation of these subareas, or there's references to some out-of-date terminology that needed to be brought up to date, given the fact that these plans are complete. The Planning Commission did recommend approval for both. Housing capacity analysis was done for each of the subareas, and 2,257 net new units in downtown are predicted between now and 2030 or so, or 35, excuse me. And then the Lakewood Station subarea plans for about 1,700 net new units within that subarea. This is creating in more internal consistency for the comprehensive plan. No specific projects are proposed, so again, a lot of these items are not applicable. The change in circumstances is the adoption of the 2 sub-area plans by the city and then needing to be brought into the comprehensive plan. No negative impacts. 2021-08 is probably the next most complicated amendment after the energy and climate change chapter. This was started as a private application actually for 3 parcels to be rezoned in the Tillicum area near the Berkeley interchange at I-5 that has been reconstructed. What has happened since is the council in February of this year adopted its second resolution related to the comprehensive plan cycle and added the 4 parcels here up near Boat Street and Portland Avenue, also in Tillicum, for review and rezoning as related to a Habitat for Humanity project. So both of these now are part of this amendment, or all of these parcels together. The Community Development Department actually recommended and the Planning Commission approved the addition of some additional parcels to the rezone. And then in addition to that, based on the analysis made for all of these parcels, it's recommended that the Tillicum Neighborhood Plan, which is now 10 years old, and then the Tillicum Center of Local Importance and some related comprehensive plan amendments, sections, excuse me, be reviewed in the 2022 or 23 cycle with some appropriate public outreach, given that it's a neighborhood plan being talked about. Planning Commission did recommend approval here. A little more analysis regarding the Tillicum Neighborhood Plan. If you'll recall, in the current comprehensive plan, there has been this urban design framework for Tillicum, which was actually first brought into the original comprehensive plan for the city. So this map, for instance, is from 1999. And so this is obviously needing to be updated given the improvements the city has made and new development that's happened since 1999 in Tillicum. And it's also recognized that some new public outreach is appropriate to help update as needed, if needed, the 2011 Tillicum Neighborhood Plan. The housing capacity analysis, what we did was take a look at the actual acreage for each of the parcels being proposed for rezoning, what its allowed units are, which are a total of 22 under current zoning, and then if they were to be rezoned as recommended, the increase. And so what you see here is a total of 150 additional units possible if this rezone were to go forward within the Tillicum area. Also available within the area would be those parcels that would be rezoned up for the Habitat for Humanity project, and that ranges from a current allowed number of units of 5 up to 12, so an increase of additional 7 units. The SEPA analysis here, looking at the consistency and where the comprehensive plan anticipates special attention to Tillicum as an area of the city needing, deserving, having the residents that need some special attention and investment by the city. So taking a look at those, it made sense to make some of the recommendations you see this evening. It's consistent also with the recent reconstruction of the I-5 Berkeley interchange. There are no specific projects per se, so all of the mitigation impacts will be handled as specific projects do come forward. The range of permitted uses you see within the Lakewood Chapter 18A 40. And the change in circumstances, obviously, first and foremost, is the change to the interchange with I-5, as well as the pending Habitat for Humanity project, which is actually kind of the culmination of 10 years of abatement and rehabilitation of some parcels within Tillicum. 2021-09 is a one sentence, or not even a full sentence, but a phrase out of a sentence change recommended by City Council, recognizing the fact that the city does not use community renewal areas. And so simply removing that from this policy while continuing to keep the point of it, which is work to reinvigorate economically blighted areas in the city. This was recommended for approval. No change to housing capacity, internal consistency, simply to recognize that community renewal areas is an obsolete phrase. It's not a specific project, so none of these are applicable. Again, the city is no longer using community renewal areas, and there's no negative impacts seen from this amendment. 2021-10 is a look at the allowed water supply facilities in our code. And really, this is one more step to clean up the 18A big major update that the council adopted a few years ago. These were simply some types of water supply facilities that were left out inadvertently from 18A. And so this is putting them back in where they should be in the code. Planning Commission recommended approval. Very quickly, little of this is actually applicable, but this is improving the consistency within the comprehensive plan and the development regulations, does not affect housing capacity, and it is correcting an oversight. The final amendment is related to 2020 and gross substitute Senate Bill 1754, which is regarding hosting of the homeless by religious organizations. And so there's some changes to one of the policies within the comprehensive plan, and there's also a change to 18A, one section within a table. So this is to take out and update the reference here within the Public Services Policy 18.4, taking out the regional plan to end chronic homelessness and inserting continuum of care and its current plan to end homelessness. And then within 18A, there is a table that talks about transitory accommodations permits, and what's being what is replacing it is a reference to hosting the homeless by religious organizations. And then the notice and who gets notices, these are all references specifically to the state statute regarding this issue, because it is very complicated, and rather than having to come back into the city's code whenever this may be changed by the state legislature, by keeping this reference to the statute itself, the city will be able to adapt to what the legislature does without having to amend 18A over and over again. Planning Commission did recommend approval here. No change to housing capacity. It does support policies that exist within the comprehensive plan. By complying with Bill 1754, which has been codified in RCW 35A Chapter 21. It is complying with some impacts. It allows the range of permitted uses per state statute that's directed that local governments do. The change in circumstance is the adoption of this bill. And then the advantages versus negative impacts. This is allowing some additional hosting of homeless rather than having them on the streets or lacking some sort of support. And it's also making sure that the city is complying with state legislative action. So having stepped through those very quickly, where we sit once more procedurally, a week from tonight is the public hearing, or I'm sorry, 2 weeks from tonight. And then there's a possibility for the council to hold a second study session should it want to on June 14th. And June 21st, the council is currently scheduled to take action on this package. So with that, I'll stop sharing and see if there's any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Questions, Mr. Bulkey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tiffany, I want to specifically talk about 2021-04.
Okay.
That seems to be what I mentioned earlier in the evenings, the statewide zoning. And I really want to understand the impacts, because when I see what you're telling me and I see, hey, in any of these things, we can put in duplexes, triplexes. Is that what it's saying? I mean, this sounds all good intellectually until we have somebody call us and say, hey, they're building an apartment next door to my house and I'm in a single family residential area. And we say, oh, we passed that in the dead of night. So explain to me what safeguards we have in there when it comes to things like design standards and those kind of things. First of all, I'd like to understand that we have built, because I don't remember passing design standards for these types of developments. And so I don't want to do anything until we know what we've got and we actually see some of these and understand from a design standpoint what these could look like, what the height limitations are, various things like that, parking limitations. And what is our drop dead date from the state of Washington on passing these I don't know what to call them. Basically overriding our own zoning for single family residential areas.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Boki. The part of the amendment is actually a reflection of the things that the city already does, which answers some of what that statute is asking for. So some of the text that you'll see is simply a consolidation and summary of all of the various things that the city already does to promote affordable housing by using the rental housing safety program and other techniques to preserve existing housing, and then also working with whatever resources there are available to provide new affordable housing. In terms of design standards for duplexes, triplexes, or multifamily, there's nothing specifically included in this amendment for that. So I'm going to defer to Mr. Buer in just a second. And then your last piece, the drop dead date, I don't have that off the top of my head, but I want to say that actually, because of the timing, we may have another comprehensive plan cycle before this is required of the city. So let me verify that and get back to you with our next presentation to the council, if that's all right. But I'll go back to Mr. Buer regarding design standards.
Up until this time, Mr. Boki, the city council has, let me say this, has not been interested in design standards in single family zones. If this is a problem or a concern, this type of housing, duplexes, triplexes, etc., that would be something that we would need to introduce. And then the council would have to decide on what is the approval process for design review. Currently, the design review process is done administratively in-house. You'd have to develop a series of criteria. We have a tendency to make it very prescriptive. You meet these sets of criteria, then your project is approved. That's what we've done in the past for multifamily, commercial, and industrial. That might be something that the council wishes to incorporate if we are building these types of structures in these zones.
So do we have any zones right now where we allow this?
We do allow for duplexes and triplexes and other zoning districts, not in the, I don't believe in the R1 through R4, but in other zones, yes.
Okay, so now we're talking about single family residential and we're talking about allowing someone to build a duplex next door. Are they under the same rules as for impervious surface and that kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
There's all you still have to meet all the parking standards, the lot coverage, impervious surface. Building height is a maximum of 35 feet. However, I will say in the sub areas, the rules are slightly different. I think the council is aware of that already, but that's what I can recall at this point in time.
So, and Tiffany mentioned, we still have the overall, we still have the overall dwelling units per acre rule. So I'd like to understand then the impact. I mean, if we have that and an area is pretty well built out, in various neighborhoods, you'd say, okay, we have more, let's say R3, which is kind of the standard, and R1 and R2 aren't even, let's just talk about R3 and R4. So a lot of neighborhoods are R3, 4.8 dwelling units to the acre. I'm not sure what neighborhoods like Oak Brook, which is mainly R3, or Lake City, which portions of our R3, how much would be developable? I mean, if I came in and I said, hey, I want to do a triplex on this property that I inherited, what's the mathematical calculation? How wide does it go? Do you take in 2 square miles of that neighborhood and say, well, the density is this, or do you take in 2 blocks, or what's the math?
Well, for a majority of the properties, the example that you have given will not work because of the existing house takes up so much of the lot. You're not going to be able to build a triplex anyway unless you do some form of lot consolidation. It's going to vary significantly from one neighborhood to one neighborhood. I will tell the council that on the west side of Lake Steilacoom, there is a large section of the properties that are currently zoned R2 that have lots of triplexes, duplexes, etc. on them. They're all legal non-conforming uses, which presents all kinds of problems. In some ways, the incorporation of these standards would take non-conforming uses and make them conforming. We also have the same issue on the north side of American Lake. There we have projects that have been approved by Pierce County many years ago, where we have single family homes, we have apartments and the like that frankly are non-conforming uses right now. And by this change, it's possible in some ways that some of those uses would be conforming. It's all going to vary upon lot size. And in some ways, if you don't, the lot size isn't changing and you cannot exceed it. So while you might be able to build a duplex, until you meet the minimum lot area, it's unlikely. I think maybe Mr. Boki, that we could, if you'd like, if the council likes, we can come back with some examples at a study session that shows you how this works.
Yeah, I'm still concerned. I feel a little bit better, and I appreciate your remarks. I just worry about that day the first one moves in and they demolish an old house, and all of a sudden there's a duplex or triplex, and it's 2 or 3 stories tall, and people are like, what did you fools just do? And saying, well, the legislature required it. I also think that I want to understand the impact. I mean, we just got done on Saturday talking about DEI. I want to understand the impact that where these are going to happen. I mean, is it going to where land is cheaper? Is that where it's going to occur? I mean, and so does this hammer on neighborhoods like Lakeview and some of our poorer neighborhoods? Are they more likely to occur? And I think that analysis also needs to be done, because if it does, if it's going to impact lower income communities, I think it should just be, we should just dismiss it out of hand. So I think we need to understand that. I don't know that we'll be able to vote on it this year. I really don't. I'd like to see what other cities do. I'd like to see how other cities not just put it in their code, but how they handle it with design standards, and how other cities look at the potential equity issues. So I would prefer that this get pulled for this year, actually, until all those things are done.
So before I go down the list, just to follow on to Mr. Bulkey's, I'd just say I share the concern. I can see a relatively narrow lot with a single family home on it, maybe a half acre. In some of these areas, I think some such things exist in Lake City. You knock down the house, you short plat it into 2 lots, and you have 2 triplexes with a minimum setback and 12 cars. And I would like to explore, we're going to get statewide zoning, I would like to explore setting some type of design standards, much as we did with respect to our cottage housing ordinance, where the incentivization for the additional density was some limitations and some amenities, some design concessions, etc., so that they had to look nicer if we're going to cram that much stuff together. I think we're heading toward, always going to be heading toward more density as we get continually urbanized, but we might be able to make it look better if we think about it a little more in advance. Mr. Whalen.
I just have a couple of questions about the climate change overview as opposed to the comprehensive plan amendments. I just wanted to say thank you, Dave and staff. I mean, it's a huge amount of work, which I think is a great step in the right direction. When we were at the Pierce County Regional Council last week, we reviewed briefly the countywide planning policies, which do include a climate change or a sustainability component. And I just wanted to ask Tiffany, because she's kind of honchoing some of the work there already, whether our work here will be hopefully consistent with what the county is doing on those policies. I know most of ours is internally focused, which is great because it's Lakewood's plan. But I want to make sure that the two don't compete unnecessarily.
They don't compete, and quite frankly, I have a feeling that many jurisdictions will be looking at what Lakewood may adopt as something that they would model their own on.
I would agree with that. My only other comment was I attended an interview, if you will, by some local reps from the Citizens Climate Lobby. Really nice, well-meaning folks that I think would be pleased as punch to see what Lakewood is doing and has done with regard to this work. I would encourage you guys to reach out to them. I think it's Dr. Ellie, I forget her last name, but she was one of the
I know who you mean, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Deputy Mayor. Yeah.
Great lady, and I think they would be really happy to be consulted, or at least have the chance to review it, because they probably would be overwhelmed with how comprehensive and well-meaning what you've drafted is currently, and probably love to have some input. I'd also check with the Master Builders Association. I think you're familiar with them.
I think so.
Yeah, and get their input as well. But really good work, and I'd like to spend more time chewing on that because there was so much good content there and great policy stuff. And in light of some of our other DEI concerns and discussions last weekend, we want to make sure that that is part of it too. So great transportation stuff there. Again, a comment on that from the Pierce Transit Commission that I sit on. They are obviously looking to noodle over whether or not to put their 0.3% on the ballot so they can expand funding for expanded routes for transit in the county. And to the extent expanded transit and routes could accomplish some of the goals under our climate change policy, it may lead us to consider supporting by resolution Pierce Transit's work in that regard, but I'm not sure yet. Mr. Buer.
Just very briefly, when it comes to climate change, and environmental justice, there's three basically capstones. One is smart growth, which we've already incorporated into many of our land use planning policies. Two, resiliency planning, which was really found under our hazards management planning. And so I think we're making good progress. And the third is market-based environmental policy,
Right.
which is we have no control over, and that's basically emissions trading and pollution taxes. So those are the three basic areas. I would also point out to the council, if you read the document carefully, there's all kinds of little interesting things in there, dealing with fair fee transit zones, low cost bus passes, and so forth. There's also other actions going on with Public Works on dealing with some of the floodplain issues in the Springbrook area, which deal directly back with resiliency planning and the hazard mitigation planning. So a lot of this is tied together. It's just difficult if you're not working on a daily basis to see it.
Nice intersection of some policy objectives, right? I mean, people are looking at coming out of COVID and encouraging transit for transit's sake and to assist lower income families, but also has a serendipity of positively impacting the climate change policies. So it could be, really a good collaborative work.
Mr. Brandstetter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess that I would just sort of say that I am really encouraged by the depth of the climate change environmental work that's presented to us. But I also have to say that I feel like the Planning Commission that I want to make sure that as we move it forward this cycle, that I've got a good understanding of what it is. And so I would say that on the timeline where it talked about a possible study session on June 14th, I would definitely like to see that study session so that we can be sure that as we move this forward, particularly if it's likely to become a benchmark for others in the region, that we understand, what we're saying and what's there, and also maybe also understand the areas of where the Planning Commission is going to relook at it to be able to go forward to do that. So again, I'm just add my voice in favor of do that. And then, Spirit, I had a question about in 2021-11, where it's a simple text change to speak about the just changing the language about what is the county plan. And are we going to see this in another year as the county approves a further homelessness sheltering plan that they're in the works of doing now to replace the continuum of care?
Mr. Branstad, are you referring to the religious hosting of the homeless?
Yeah, but there's a text change in there that spoke to referring to a specific county plan that, which is the current plan, so we should go ahead and do that. But a year from now, is that plan going to be, if not replaced, supplemented by an additional plan?
I couldn't answer that clearly for you because right now the county council is in the process of looking at a recommendation to create a comprehensive plan to end homelessness. The county council will actually take action tomorrow afternoon, presumably on their resolution 2021-82, which would put into motion the process of a new group, some of which include continuum of care representatives, but creating a new plan that will be due back to them by end of September this year. So yeah, if there's a desire by this council to make the language in this amendment a little more vague and open for future changes by the county council without having to make another amendment down the road, we can certainly look at that.
I'd actually not in favor of vague. I'm in favor of doing this, but recognizing that we may then want to change the specificity with an amendment in the next cycle. Okay, that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks. So for Ms. Farmer, I'd like to follow on that. Yeah, I have an issue with 18.4, which I believe is what Mr. Branstad was referring to. Refers to a continuum of care plan. I just reviewed that. The continuum of care is an kind of an entity. It's not even really an entity. It is not elected. It's self-perpetuating. And they are currently semi-functional. They had a 2005 plan, which was adopted by the county council then. The 2005 plan was to reduce homelessness by 50% by 2015. The plan was to give money to the continuum of cares members, and that happened. And one of the principal, the linchpin of that program was to build 500 units of permanent supporting housing for the relatively modest sum of about $125,000, $150,000 a unit based on 2005 prices. That did not occur. So they had a plan, they didn't execute the plan, they took the money, and the problem got worse. And the continuum of care is unelected and semi-functional. So I would object to having that verbiage in there referring to them. We, I think, are well suited to come up with our own directives as to how we are to spend the money. But is correct that the county council is now mulling over what to do. Although one of their suggestions was that they would reduce street homelessness to 0 in 6 months, which given the last 15-year history is, I think, quite unrealistic. So we might want to focus on our own goals and objectives rather than adopting ones that have failed. That's just me. Ms. Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Buer, I wanted to compliment you on spearheading this work and all the other team members who worked with you, and just the sheer volume and the comprehensive nature of it all. I bring 8 years of environmental experience to the table, and it was a joy to read, and I was diving in, and I have pages and pages of notes. I'm sure you're just really excited about that. So I'd love to chat with you further. I'm looking forward to the study session. It was impressive that there were policy sections and also the tactical ideas to support that in, everything from public education to actual infrastructure changes, equipment, fleet, that sort of thing. So anyway, kudos to you, and I'm looking forward to continued conversation.
Back to the climate change initiatives, Mr. Buer. Here's my ignorance. I am familiar with MTCO2 for metric tons of CO2. I always thought MG was magnesium. What's MgCO2?
I'd have to go back and look at that. It refers to million something. And so I will report back to you, Mr. Anderson. I get them confused as well. And in various documents, they use different titles and different ways of calculating it. I will, let me come back with an answer.
That'd be great. And one thing I didn't see or hear about was purchasing of credits. Not that I would advocate it, but as an out in a long-term policy, I think as adopting a broad policy, it might be favorably received by those who impose things on us, and B, maybe an out someday that Lakewood hasn't attained an unattainable goal, therefore it's going to hurt us in scoring on transportation funding, or Chris Transit can't get its next 50 electric buses or whatever it is, and that we could buy credits from Shenzhen, China, who spews coal in the air. So maybe if it's appropriate, that could be one of the just tools that we're open to, not that we prioritize it or actually use it.
Okay.
Just really quickly, Mr. Mayor, MG is apparently referring to metric tons.
Really?
Mhm.
So what's,
I don't know.
MgCO2 is actually a chemical compound, and
Yeah.
MT metric ton makes sense, but I don't know what the G comes from.
Yeah.
It's a riddle. Thanks. Any other questions? Well, there's more work, and I do commend you folks, especially on the difficult maze that is addressing climate change. So it's getting closer to understandable all the time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then we move on to city manager reports.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Good evening, council members. Actually, while Mr. Bueller and looks like Ms. Spear are still not on the line, but Mayor and council, might I suggest in advance of the June 14th study session, I know you have a lot of questions, comments, regarding these, either the comp plan amendments or the climate change chapter. And I think what would be helpful, if you again have questions or just comments, if you could get those over to us, say by June 7th, which is 2 weeks from today, we could then incorporate that into the presentation on June 14th, if you wish. So I would just offer that as a resource to help facilitate, again, the discussion on June 14th. I have a number of updates I'd like to share with the council. The first is, I think, as you know, the city of Lakewood has been participating in a Pierce County-wide vaccination task force. Some good news to report in that cases per 100,000 population have decreased the last week or two. Hospitalization rates are still steady. The outbreaks in schools they say has increased, but the amount is really, really small. I would just point that out. And then also the outbreaks amongst businesses has decreased pretty significantly. In total, 32% of all residents in Pierce County are completely vaccinated. That compares to 38% statewide. So we lag a little bit behind there. Likewise, we lag behind in terms of residents with at least one dose here in Pierce County. We're at 41%, while the state is at 48%. So we do continue to make some progress there. So just wanted to report out on that. Also, just wanted to give you a heads up at your next regular meeting under reports by the city manager. One of the updates we want to provide you is, as well as a recommendation on moving forward, is you'll recall that during last fall, you appropriated the 1% of the general fund for human services and social services funding. And typically you would do that for 2 years. However, last year you allocated the funding to a wide range of entities for only 1 year. And the reason being is because you wanted to see how the pandemic would have as an impact on the community and, all of those things. And so I just wanted to give you a heads up that, based on our conversations with our providers and what's going on in the world and this and that, our recommendation is going to be to continue that same appropriation to those agencies that you provided funding for this year to continue into 2022. However, an option for the council is not to do that, but rather to open up the whole process again and go through that review process. But again, I just wanted to give you a heads up. That's what you can expect to hear from our human services team at your next regular meeting on Monday, June 7th. Yeah, unfortunately, we had some bad weather this week, and so we had some road work that was going to occur, specifically the final touches on Lakewood Drive between Fleck Creek and Stilican Boulevard, the striping. So we have to put that off till later on in the week. It looks like there might be a window on Wednesday to be able to do that. If not, based on current weather forecasts, it might have to wait until next week. Likewise, the pavement overlay was supposed to occur beginning today on 108th, but again, because of the weather, the rain, that too has been pushed off. So a little bump in the road there. Youth summer camps, I wanted to give you an update in terms of what Ms. Dodsworth, our Parks and Recreation Director, and her staff have been up to. So between July 6th and August 25th, we're going to have a couple of programs. One is a mobile park program, which will rotate between Springbrook Park, Harry Todd Park, and Wards Park, and providing a number of activities, including arts and crafts and games and special events. Again, this summer. Actually, I want to specifically thank the Lions Club for their kind donation of $3,000 in support of this initiative. Also, Ms. Dodsworth and her team are going to be offering some summer camps during this time period as well. This is in partnership with Pierce County's Kids Need to Play. And this year, typically these camps are, upwards of $200 per week. However, this year we will be offering an 80% discount because of some funding that's coming through Pierce County. So the fee will be significantly discounted to $30. Most of these camps are going to be over at Fort Stilican Park and or the Pavilion, providing a wide range of athletic events and other activities. Also, the Parks and Recreation Department is also working on a fishing event, some orienteering within our parks, as well as some other types of activities, again, to try and keep our younger members, our kids and even teenagers and youth engaged during the summer months. Also, I know the council had mentioned a couple of weeks ago their desire to create some kind of a youth employment program. And so we've taken a look at that. It's a very, very short timeline to try and implement something. We did reach out to Tacoma in terms of their Summer Jobs 253 program. However, at this point in time, it doesn't look like that's going to come to fruition. However, the good news is that we have received some very favorable feedback to partner with Lakewood's communities and schools, as well as the Clover Park School District. And the school district would provide the youth, obviously, and CIS would provide some staff resources. And the city, in turn, would then reach out to the community to identify some projects and programs and opportunities for these young people. Also, CIS would also provide an opportunity for leadership training and transition support after high school graduation and even beyond. So we do have a proposal. I'm going to ask Ms. Dodsworth to present that to you as part of your next regular meeting under reports by the city manager. Our cost estimate to provide this is $68,000+, and our recommendation would be to use the ARPA monies to do that. So again, just wanted to give you a heads up on that's what we're thinking. Also just wanted to give you a kind of just a courtesy heads up on this. And this is something that kind of takes us away from our day job. And that is that our development services team recently has been receiving some building plan submittals that have falsified engineering and architectural stamps. The good news is so far our team has been able to identify them because a lot of these stamps go back 15, 20 years, and they recognize that they're from people who have actually either passed away or retired. And obviously that's fraud. That's some pretty significant things that you're not supposed to be doing. Mr. Buer has reached out to the State Department of Licensing to see what steps that they can take from an enforcement standard. Likewise, we're looking at some steps. But this is a pretty brazen activity for a developer or builder to come in and submit plans that have been approved either from an engineering or architectural standpoint. Also, kind of the giveaway is on several of the instances, it was pretty clear that an engineer or an architect hadn't reviewed them because they were so poorly done. But was wanted to give you a heads up on that. And the reason being, not just because it's pretty significant, but also, again, it takes us away from being able to handle, the people who are properly submitting their plans and getting those turned around. On the ARPA funds, and kind of we're working through this, Ms. Kraus and her team initiated the online process to draw down on our first 50% of the $13.7 million. Long story short, the Department of Treasury has set up a system to ensure that the people who are actually drawing down the monies are who they say they are. Typically, when we do online grant drawdowns, we utilize the city's either DUNS number or EIN number as a municipal entity. However, this time it's a little different in that Treasury is asking the individual who is doing the draw to provide a wide range of personal information through something called ID.me. And I'm just going to tell you, I don't feel comfortable either asking or certainly directing one of my staff to do that. We have reached out to our Congresswoman's office. They have verified that, yeah, that is in fact what they're doing. The National Leagues of Cities held a webinar last week, and this issue came up, and a number of cities brought it up. And so we provided some feedback on how this could be easily facilitated without having to go through this extra step of a city staff person identifying them that they are actually with the city of Lakewood. In addition, we have reached out to Association of Washington Cities to see if there's any assistance that they can provide or if they're hearing from other cities. So far, they've only heard a little bit of scuttlebutt on this issue. However, they were in on the webinar that Ms. Spear was in on earlier in the week, and they heard that as well. So just wanted to keep you appraised on that, and I'm sure one way or the other we'll be able to get it resolved and be able to do our draw on our funds here shortly.
Mr. Caulfield, to avoid delay, although I'm not an employee, the mayor should be okay. I am in the ID.me system for some federal veterans benefits. So I'm in there. So I have no objection to my name and identity being used because it's been used to verify me on several different things. So it would save a lot of effort on yours and the city's part and get our money quicker. And we wouldn't have to ask anybody.
Let me, I'll run that by our Ms. Kraus to see if that's something that we can accommodate. Thank you. I know this evening you got a great update from our legislative team down in Olympia. One of the things that we are now moving forward with is evaluating the tax increment financing bill that did make it out of the session. There's a, long story short, TIF is a math exercise. The good news is that we have TIF. The not so good news is that the bill was watered down a little bit in terms of the state's portion is not available. So we're going to have to run the numbers to see where and how this could work. However, one of the benefits of the program is that we can actually have two districts within the city. So we're not just limited to one. But overall, we do view it as a very, very positive economic development tool. And again, we're going to get underway to take an evaluation of that here in the coming months to see where's the best place that we can utilize it. And first and foremost, we'll be focusing on, of course, Lakewood Landing. Another bill that came out of the session is 5287, which provided some revisions to the multifamily tax exemption. I won't go through all of what those are here this evening, but I did want to let you know that our team in Community and Economic Development is doing a comprehensive review of that. And we expect to bring forward some recommended changes to your code under Chapter 3.64, where the multifamily tax exemption sits in the city's municipal code as part of your August 23rd study session. Between now and then, there are two multifamily tax exemption applications that are pending. These actually predate the new state law 5287, so we do need to move those forward to you. And if you wish to take action and approve them, you can. It's totally up to you. And we expect to bring those two proposals forward to you as part of your July 12th study session. Myself and our communications manager, Jim Kopriva, met again with Waste Connections as a follow-up to the spring cleanup last month. And I think, as you remember, as a recap, it was a beautiful weekend, a lot of positive weather, a lot of notification by the city. And then there was a lot of larger vehicles that showed up that Waste Connections, hadn't really noticed in the past. We did inquire if they'd be able to do another event later this spring or even summer. Actually, we're getting into the summer months. They again communicated they just don't have the resources to be able to do that. So we're looking out toward the fall event. However, one of the things that they did agree to do was to extend the hours beginning in the fall on Sunday to match up to the hours on Saturday. So both days events will run from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., increasing the time from 10 hours to 12 hours over the weekend. In addition, to help with the flow of the vehicles, they plan on rearranging their ramp to allow up to 5 vehicles to come up and dump as opposed to 4. Their analysis shows that by doing that, coupled with increasing the number of hours and assuming about 5 minutes per resident to dump their trash, that they can handle up to 360 vehicles a day, or 720 over the two-day period. We've never really come close to that in the past, and so but that's what their calculations show. One of the things that the city also agreed with was no large trailers larger than 4 feet by 8 feet. A trailer 4 feet by 8 feet can easily accommodate both a couch and a large refrigerator. However, allowing U-Hauls or those budget rent-a-car vehicles, the big boxes, the white boxes, this is for residential cleanup. And what we learned last time is that causes an incredible amount of delay and probably did result in a lot of the backup that was occurring. They regularly noted that, those large vehicles, when they backed up, they were up on the ramp for 20 minutes, 25 minutes. There were several that are up there for 45 minutes. And again, this is supposed to be a free drop-off event for our residents. There are better options for those types of activities as well, including the Hidden Valley transfer station, as well as the facility down the road on I-5 in Thurston County. One of the things that Waste Connections is also going to do is to provide a standalone 40-yard bin for some of the smaller garbage loads. One of the things that both the city and Waste Connections noticed was, folks coming in with, a few items. And rather than having them sit and stand in the line, getting all the way down to the ramp, we're going to send those folks off to a separate bin, similar to the metal and the tire disposal units, where those will go. The other is making sure that folks have, as more of a safety issue, have proper footwear. Waste Connections noticed that there were a number of people that showed up when they get out of their vehicles on the ramp, and they didn't have clothes. They didn't even have, they were wearing flip-flops and things like that. And folks, when they come out there, they need to have closed toes shoes and things like that, given just the heavy commercial environment that they're there. Our next steps is a couple of things. One is to identify a weekend in the fall. Typically, it's the latter part of October, early November. Also, we're still working and looking at the flow of traffic, both coming into the site and going out of the site. And the Buhan Market, the owners there, have been very gracious in offering a sizable footprint of their facility in the back that we might use as a staging area. So those are some of the things that we've been talking about as it relates to our next event. Want to report that get some more good news on some transportation grants. One of these actually we knew about, but in summary, with the state's budget being finalized, we were notified that we received one bike and pedestrian grant and 2 safe routes to school grants. The bike and pedestrian grant is actually in support of some pedestrian crossing and other improvements over at Pine and 84th. And this would actually be in support of Ward's Lake and the improvements that are going to be occurring at that facility. And by the way, these 3 grants design would get underway for these 3 projects in 22, followed by construction in 23. And that's an $883,000 grant. The 2 safe routes to school grants, one is 112th, that fronts Clover Park High School between Gravely Lake Drive and Highland. That's a $656,000 grant. This is something that we'll recommend be part of a larger 112th Street improvement project between Gravely Lake Drive and Bridgeport later this summer, either with city monies or perhaps, knock on wood, with some sound transit funds. The other one, this was the one that we actually knew about. The second Safe Routes to School grant is over on Far West Drive by Lakes High School, and it's a fill-in between 112th and about 91st Street Court West. And that's actually a $1.336 million grant. So some good news there. Also, Department of Ecology let us know that it is likely that they are going to be providing the city $183,000 over a 2-year period for 21 and 22 in support of the city's stormwater inspection and outreach program. This is actually funds to supplant our existing programs and not really to so much expand or enhance. And this is money that they've been making available to cities for a number of years. And we've applied in the past, but we haven't received it. And this year we did, or for the next 2 years. And hopefully we can keep this money coming into our stormwater utility. We finalized our federal funding request of $2.4 million to Senator Murray's office last week. We're finalizing our application to Senator Cantwell's. You might recall that Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland has already made this project a priority, so if we can get it in the House and the Senate side, that would be good. And we were fortunate to be able to receive a number of letters of support for our community. We were also notified by what used to be OEA, which is now the Local Defense Community Cooperation Organization, is they have opened the grant application process for the Defense Community Infrastructure Program, or DCIT, and the deadline to submit is July 12th. And so we're going to get underway in preparing that application, as well as getting our letter of support from the JBLM Garrison Commander. And of course, that's the final funding piece that we need in support of phase 2 of the JBLM North Corridor Access Project, from which is Washington Boulevard, from interlocking down to Edgewood to Northgate Road to the edge of JBLM. And right now we're estimating that the grant ask will be about $4.5 million or so. Steilacoom Boulevard between Weller and Custer /88th. Tacoma Public Utilities is going to be out there beginning on June 1st, replacing and moving all of their poles. That's at the request of the city, so that later on in the fall, we can come in and put in the sidewalks on the back end of the curbs and gutters that the city installed last year. TPU estimates that this is going to be about a 3-month process for them to move those poles. They have to be dug out. New holes have to be dug, poles put in, then the utilities moved, and then the old poles removed. In addition, it's just not TPU. There's other utilities that hang their wire there. They too are going to have to come in during the process and move their utilities. So during, at least the next 3 months, one lane will be closed in at least one direction, if not both directions, while TPU does this. TPU is doing this with all of their funds, and that's something that's called for in our franchise agreement. Right now, TPU is estimating that their cost is about $1.5 million to do all of this work. I also wanted to report that our Public Works Engineering Department has sent out several correspondence out to folks out in Tilikum regarding sewer deferrals. If you recall, there's 29 properties out there that should be connecting in 2021. However, the council, because of COVID, made the decision to give them the choice whether or not they wanted to connect. So far 17 have gotten back to us and said that they do want to take advantage of the 1-year deferral. And so we're waiting on the remainder to get back with us. So we're going to send out another letter to those folks to see if they are interested in taking advantage of the deferral. And then lastly, our community connector, the Stryker Brigade, is holding a dedication ceremony over on Lancer Field, over on their facility this Thursday, May 27th, and it is begins at 2:00 in the afternoon. And a number of city representatives, of course, including, of course, the mayor and the council, have been invited. I've provided an e-invite to you to attend. And so if you're interested in attending, please fill that out. If you have any, if you need any help filling out those e-invites, please let us know, and we'd be more than happy to help you with that. So with that, Mayor and Council, that's my report.
4:00 on Thursday.
2:00. I think it's 2:00, isn't it?
It's 2:00, yes, sir.
1400.
1400 on JBLM.
Mr. Branstetter.
Yes, and Mr. Caulfield, on the recommendation that you forewarned us about the rather than going through a new competitive cycle of just moving forward with the human services 1% allocation, it does seem to me that one of the other reasons that we only did it for a year is that we thought that the general fund revenue estimate would vary between the 2 years, and that perhaps in the second year, 1% of anticipated general fund revenues would be different, hopefully greater than the first time. So if that analysis could also be done so that we're sure that as revenues have gotten better, that we're still talking about 1%.
That's correct, Councilmember Branstetter. That will be part of the report on June 7th.
All right, that's all. Thank you, Mayor.
Ms. Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Caulfield, you had mentioned, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, I'll think of it, but where is, I don't know how to get to Lancer Field. I know where Watkins Field is. Is that different?
Yes, it is. And we can provide a map for you, but Lancer Field is over on JBLM, well, what I call Fort Lewis, North Fort Lewis, but it's called JBLM North now. So that's where there's the 2-2, where their headquarters building is, and they have a big open field there where they have a wide range of events there, but we can get you a map, Councilmember Moss.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing was that you had mentioned my mind is going crazy. I can't believe this. Oh, on the fraud thing that you talked about, there's a lot of fraud going on right now. So I got a friend's request from our former mayor, Ron Lucas, last week. And that was kind of, it's terrible. That was what I just wanted to share. There's a lot of fraud.
Yeah, Ms. Moss, just kind of as a general orientation for the Lancer Field, if you came on to, I know you're familiar with North Fort in general. So if you came on from the freeway and you're heading west into North Fort, and you get to that little commercial area, it's quite a far down to the right, back toward the Veterans Hospital. It's a little more difficult to get to now that they closed the gate off of Northgate Road back there, but it's tucked back there. So if you keep going, you aren't too far. If you go too far past it, you're going to run out of Fort Lewis.
Okay, so when I come off the freeway, I'm gonna go to the right.
Yes,
Yes.
into North Fort. You're going to go down to where there's a small commercial area, gas station, C-store kind of place, and you turn right.
Okay,
Go
thank
back.
you. Thank you.
Any other questions? With respect to the human services contracts, while that analysis being done, I think we should take a look at the performance in the last year. Just anecdotally, nonprofits in the COVID environment have either been overwhelmed or in some cases doing absolutely nothing. And so we contracted with folks to do X, Y, and Z. And some of them probably overperformed and some of them may have underperformed. I think we should look at not necessarily going out and finding and doing a whole new process, but there might be some consideration for readjustment based on who had exceeded their goals and who, if somebody fell, if they didn't perform the contract, it's a reimbursable thing. We might want to look at that too. And so I'm not suggesting a whole new process, but just within what we have, my recollection is these are reimbursement contracts. Perform the metrics, you get the money. And some of them may not perform the metrics because they were unable to or decided to shut down rather than trying to plow through. Also on the false engineering stamps, really kind of a question for the city attorney that I don't expect an answer to tonight, but that's pretty significant. It affects public safety and confidence. And I don't like people to cheat. So I would like to see that referred for criminal prosecution if there's evidence that might sustain a charge.
We'll follow up. We will find out exactly what was going on and we'll confer about what steps can be taken.
If I've, in the past practice, run into false notaries. When a dead notary shows up on a new document, and usually it was something like getting a loan, so there was a federal criminal charge and trying to defraud a financial institution. But I don't think we should look at that kindly. Any further questions? And we go to council comments. Mr. Volkey.
I don't have anything tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Ms. Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I represent the city with the Air Force Association, and based on opportunities provided if COVID allows, we have started making plans toward a couple of events that's going to be taking place. And one is a golf tournament that's going to be August 13th, and that one's going to be on McCord Field. And then the Air Force Ball is back into the making. It's going to be in September, but the date has not been finalized on that one. And finally, I have been given permission to join the webinar with the District Municipal Courts Judges Association. That's going to take place on the 27th. And the topic is on diversity in the jury pool. So I'm really interested and looking forward to being a part of that because we've had that discussion before, and including the TNT. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thanks. Mr. Branstetter.
Mr. Mayor, all I would comment is that I found our work on Saturday to be profitable and a sound basis for going forward. That's all I have.
Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to compliment the Parks Department. I went to the farmers market on Friday. So amazing, going almost every Friday if I can. So I just really love to see that so much of the community was there and that it's just growing. And then I'm really looking forward to the other events, their drive-in events that they're going to have and the summer concerts. Great job.
Ms. Farmer.
I wanted to circle back to the community cleanups. And I know that the idea of a smaller scale free cleanup for residents is baked into our franchise agreement. But having been out there and seen the care with which some landlords had taken the initiative and gone in and cleaned up properties and thrown a whole bunch of stuff into and crammed it into every nook and corner of their vehicles. And we're really looking to that as a way to help clean up Lakewood. I would love to revisit our goals for why we offer the cleanups twice a year and perhaps think bigger. Just throwing that out there for future thought. I also very much appreciated the work that we did on Saturday at the retreat, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation about the near final draft on the council goals. I too went to the farmers market on Friday and was excited to see the return of all the vendors and the excitement in the air, and really want to compliment Sally and her team on everything that they did. And they're already thinking about this week and all of the changes and some reconfigurations and that sort of thing. So that was awesome. Tomorrow evening, I'll be attending the Parks Recreation Advisory Board. We have a full docket, including looking at an application for renaming a portion of the city. And that will be followed by the North Lakewood Neighborhood Association, where I believe our city manager is giving a State of the City address. And that's all that I have. Thank you.
Mr. Whalen.
Thursday last was a busy day. I had the Pierce Transit Finance Committee meeting, and they discussed fare box revenue recovery and whether or not to increase fares, and they elected to kind of defer that for the time being, which is a good thing, given that we're trying to encourage transit. They also looked at route reviews. It's a continuing effort to streamline and enhance services by reducing routes that are less utilized, but that's going through a public participation process to determine which routes will actually be dropped, or how many station stops between routes may be consolidated. And then finally, we already discussed the possibility of going to the ballot in November for the 0.3% increase to enhance the services and the schedules that they provide for Pierce County residents. So more to follow on that. And then later that evening, I was at the Pierce County Regional Council. As we discussed a little bit today, they're going through the countywide planning policies and draft. More to follow on that. Tiffany made a presentation. Tiffany Spear did a great job there in her part. And it was a long day. So Saturday was fun. I enjoyed seeing all of you, and I think we did good work at the retreat. So thank you for allowing me to participate via Zoom, but I'm looking forward to getting together. That's it.
Yeah, so it wasn't because you don't like us.
Right.
We did enjoy getting together. That was nice. I think it enhanced the productivity. Yeah, thanks again to all of you for coming and so valuably participating on Saturday. The only thing I had to add is that on Thursday, last Thursday, City Manager Caulfield and I participated in kind of an informal thank you retirement lunch with about a half dozen people to give Tom Knight, the departing. What?
I didn't make it.
Oh, that's right. You didn't make it. You were supposed to be there.
That's right.
Yeah, he had bats in his belfry.
Yeah,
literally.
That's right. Literally.
Yeah, it all runs together. Who was on the list? So yeah, it was the city manager from Lacey and some folks from JBLM and Bill Adamson, and we actually formally gave him his SSMCP a plaque, but it was well received. I think he's going to surface as something other than a doting grandfather because he's been so energetic and such a good partner over the years, and he did volunteer to be a resource anytime we wanted to call him. And his replacement has been named and will be coming in from Bliss, what, I forget where.
I believe Fort Riley.
Fort Riley, Kansas. Yeah, that's it. So we look forward to meeting him and building that relationship. Is there anything further to come before the council? If not, we'll see you next Monday, if not sooner. We're adjourned.